This episode of The People of PCPS is brought to you through the generous support of Joe Fisher's office at Midstate Educators Insurance. For more information, visit insurepolk.com. Welcome to the People of PCPS, a Polk County Public Schools podcast. This podcast is dedicated to telling the stories of teachers, paraeducators, support staff, students, volunteers, alumni, and all the people who contribute to Polk County Public Schools. Whether they're working in the school district, learning in our classrooms, or using their education to improve our community, the people are what make Polk County Public Schools great. Let's get to know our colleagues, our students, our neighbors, and our friends, the people of PCPS.
Hi, and welcome everyone to People of PCPS. I'm Rachel Pleasant. I'm the Senior Director of Communications here at Polk County Public Schools. And the People of PCPS is a podcast we've created to simply tell the stories of the people within our organization. We believe that the teachers and the students and the support staff and the administrators, they are what make the school district great. And so the People of PCPS is a time that we've created and to set aside just to focus on them and what they contribute to our organization. I'm very, very excited that today I have with me Karen Hagerty, who is a teacher. She teaches in the GED program at East Area Adult School. And she really makes a difference every day teaching non-traditional students and helping them to get this credential that will set them up for lifelong success. So welcome, Karen.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
We met during a recent visit that I made to East Area Adult School. And when I was introduced to you as the person who teaches the GED program, I was instantly very curious because I love the stories that happen within our non-traditional student population. And so I was very curious about the teacher of that population as well. What led you to, as we talked out that day, I understand you took a very winding path to your career. What did you do prior to becoming a GED program teacher?
Prior to teaching at all, I worked in the tourism industry. My last position was the full-time Director of Public Relations and Marketing for Buck Tower Gardens. Okay. And then I had a little boy, and I took a year off. Mm-hmm. And in that year, I started the certification process because I needed something that would be more conducive to being a parent. Mm-hmm. And really couldn't work the long hours that I worked anymore. Mm-hmm. And it was gut-wrenching because I loved what I did, and I had worked for 15 years to get to that level in public relations that I was looking for from my entire career, and I thought that would be what I did forever, but things change, and so I ended up teaching, and I started off with high school because I wanted to make a difference with adults. Like I knew they were almost adult, but I had a passion for. I don't know if it would be everything high school or if it's just that at the heart of what I do is I was a writer, and I was looking to ladder into something with writing, and so I did yearbook and newspaper, and so that age group was more conducive for that because they would have already had a lot of training, right. And they would have been easier to mold into like Associated Press writing or something like that. And so I started in August, and then in January, one of the APs had asked me if I wanted to take over this class to do an after-school program for, it was adult ed, but at the time it was like high school students who needed to pick up credits, things like that. And I said, sure. And so I started off doing this part-time with English because I was certified in English. And I did that for just a semester. And then the following year, a GED classroom opened. And, we don't just teach at our school. We have satellite programs all over the county to make it easy for people to get to any of our classrooms that they don't have to drive very far. And I had picked up a classroom in Loftman at Loftman Oaks Elementary, which is the closest school until you leave the county on the north end of Polk. Okay. And I did that for 4 years and just got to know the staff. And then a job opened up. I taught 4 years full-time at Haines City High School. And then the job opened up for GED at our school on the main campus. And the woman who had retired, had been there 25 years.
Oh, wow.
So she retired, and I just lateraled in, and I can honestly say I don't know that I knew completely what I was getting myself into, because even though I taught it part-time, it's nothing like when you're submerged in it all the time.
Well, what is it like? What are some of the things that you see teaching GED students?
Just in who they are and their personalities.
Yeah, the challenges they're facing. And
I love it because one thing I learned is, how when you're teaching, well, I'm assuming that you taught, but children don't like change. So like if you have a substitute teacher, you know that class isn't going to be the same all day, and you kind of wonder what you're going to come back to the next day. Adults are the exact same way. They don't like change. You get attached to them. And sometimes when they move on, it's kind of hard to let them go because they've been your babies for so long, even though they're adults.
Yeah.
So it's the same mentality no matter what age level you teach, because they're yours. And you don't know how much time you have to impact their life, because adult ed has a program called open enrollment, which means students are enrolled every Monday. And because it's adult oriented, they can drop out and they can come back, and they can drop out and they can come back, and they haven't missed anything, which is a big difference from K-12 because it's a self-prescribed program. So they just come in and they roll back into classes and they pick up where they left off and they keep going. And so when you lose them for a little bit, you think, oh, I got to get them back, because I know what their end result is because I've done it for so long. But for the student who is submerged in it, and you have to figure some of them are going to school from grade 1 all the way through 12 in our school. So it takes everybody a different time frame, because you have, somebody who grew up in America is going to adjust and adapt to it a little bit different because they've been through the way that American schools operate. But somebody from a different country might have never stepped foot in a classroom. And so you're pulling them all the way through to high school education, and it's really self-paced. So some of them can learn pretty quickly and some of them don't. And it's funny because you almost know from what country they're coming from where they're going to excel before they even really get into the curriculum. Because you just learn over years like where the countries are that like teach really strong math. Things like that. I have a student last year who spoke 6 languages, and he was from Africa, and 3 of them were tribal that aren't even languages that are written. And he came into my room, and I was like, okay, well, he's going to blow math away, and then it'll be hit and miss on the rest of it. And sure enough, he was in my class maybe a month, and then he took the GED math test and passed it. And we're still working on the other 3.
Wow, that is fascinating.
Yeah.
So the way, just sort of a basic question here, the way GED works is, how does it, if I dropped out in the 6th grade, what am I doing when I come to you?
Okay, so we have an entry test called the CASAS Goals, and students come in and they take a test, and it tells us what level that they're being placed in. So we have adult basic education, which is basically grade 1 to 8, and then there's GED, which is grade 9 to 12. So they are placed in a reading class or a math class depending on where that score fell. So sometimes I get students who are across the board GED, and sometimes I might get them for reading only, but they're still an ABE for math and vice versa. And so the goal is to get them into my classroom all day, GED across the board, and at that point we start introducing science and social studies concepts, and then they're literally learning all 4 of those tests, the content area or the content in general for all 4 of those subjects, and then we just take the test one at a time. So the GED is a national test, and then every county kind of does their own way of teaching, to get to the student to that level. And so we have an amazing program that we've used over the years where students are uniform in the books and uniformed in the curriculum, and then the teacher walks around. And although we do whole group instruction, a lot of it is breaking it down individually for each person at whatever level that they're on. For instance, an ABE classroom can have somebody learning something in the 1st grade but at the 8th grade at the same time. So how do you teach that basic concept to the beginning learner who never stepped foot in a classroom because they grew up in another country and are just learning how to read in English, and then turn around and transition the 8th grader into the high school curriculum? So we have to really know our curriculum well and learn our students well and scaffold well and just know how to manage all of it at once. And at the same time, not one student in the classroom knows what the other one, where they are academically. Because if you're in my classroom, you're all the same. And you may be learning something different but for a different goal, because somebody might be trying to get into the 5th grade and somebody else is trying to get into the 10th grade, but they don't know that because you don't discuss scores with students. But it's just a lot of fun. And what I love about having different people in the classroom is you're literally running a little international classroom at times. We have so many people who come from different countries, and this is sometimes the first opportunity they have to learn. And then we have other people who was a practicing physician in other countries, and they're here to learn English. So they may be in one of our classes learning, and so other students just assume, oh, this person's here for a GED as well. No, they're learning to read and write English so they can take their state boards to turn around and serve you in the medical field. So it can be anything from anywhere from a student who, like I said, has never stepped foot in a classroom to somebody who just needs to master our language to be able to do what they went to college to do.
Wow. So
a lot of fun.
In that classroom, you kind of gave me a hypothetical, but I guess that's probably been a real-life situation where you have a student learning on the 1st grade and a student learning on the 8th grade level, right?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, you're giving whole class instruction, right? How do you do that? And what does that look like? Like, just help me understand how I can't imagine how you do that.
When you teach a lesson, somebody's assignment literally could be learning to define what you're doing and putting into pictures, and somebody else is learning how to put it in context. So they may be holding different assignments in front of them, but I'm teaching the same in front. Okay. Just like you would in a classroom where you have various students with disabilities or problems learning, but on a much larger scale.
You've mentioned several times the international aspect of your job. I just don't think that most people would occur to most people when they think about the GED program at East Area Adult that you have. But tell me a little bit more about that. Like, what kind of countries have you seen people come through your classroom representing different countries? What countries have you seen? And just give me a sense of the stories of these people that you've seen in your classroom.
I've watched it change over the years. When I first started teaching, it was more European. We would see a lot of people from the European nations, with a little bit of South America thrown in there, maybe a sprinkle of Africa here and there. Now it's primarily South American, Mexican. A lot of the immigrants coming in speak primarily Spanish, maybe different dialects, or Portuguese. I have had Arabic students, and it's so cute because they're learning our language, but in their language, they write under the line where we write on top of the line. So the student's trying to write English, and my eyes are seeing what they're doing, but it's transitioning in my mind to not get lost in what they're doing because I'm trying to read on top of the line. So I'm not, and they're on, and I'm like, whoa, wait. And sometimes I've had people come in who write from right to left instead of left to right.
Okay.
And you get that in some Arabic nations too. And so to transition them to completely switch everything they've learned in their brain their whole lives to flipping it literally upside down and writing left to right instead of right to left, or right to left instead of top to bottom.
Right. And you learn all this as you go as well, right? There's no training for how to teach a student from...
Well, sometimes we trip over it, but it's all fun. When we learn, just like all the other teachers learn, you take what you've learned from, your ESE classes and your ESOL classes and your scaffolding classes and classroom management. It all comes together, and you just learn. And over the years, it becomes automatic. I can usually figure out within the first 15 minutes of working with a student if they have a learning disability. And I know that doesn't sound like much, but adults, a lot of them, especially in my generation, they didn't diagnose disabilities. Like when a student was 50, it comes in my room and they're 45, 55, 65 years old. Back when they were in grade school and high school, you didn't, you stood in the corner if you didn't keep up with the students. And so dyslexia wasn't talked about or even diagnosed. And so teachers didn't have to learn how to do anything with those students because those things didn't exist like they do today. We've just made such huge strides in trying to figure out how the human mind works. And when you put that in a little child, just imagine they're sponges taking that all in. And so by the time we get the adults who used to be those children trying to figure it out with a disability and they give up, how's my classroom going to be any different than what they envisioned when they were, when they think about their childhood? Some of them might even have been bullied because they were told they couldn't learn or they were dumb or things like that. And you always see these pictures of kids with dunce hats in the cartoons, and I just wonder how many students actually had to go through that, because that's a real thing at some point in our country.
Yeah.
So they come in, and for a student who's never been told, like, well, maybe you have a learning disability. And, we're not allowed to do that. I can't diagnose anybody. But through experience, you learn this student has to learn a little different. Or if I have a student who comes in and they write out a sentence and there's capital letters in the middle of every word. And I say, why do you do that capital letter? And they say, well, I can figure that out when it's a capital letter. Well, they're dyslexic, but they've never been told that. So they write however they visually need to for themselves. And a lot of these kids figure it out themselves. A lot of them come to me and teachers have taught them that. So we get a little bit of both. So it's just fun to try to figure out where they came from. It's all part of their journey, regardless of what brought them to my classroom, regardless of why they dropped out. I get to figure them out like a puzzle and figure out how am I going to put all these pieces together, because they come in with a lot of baggage. A lot of them are married or divorced. They have kids. They've raised kids. They've been through it all. They're juggling a full-time job with school at night, and a lot of them take phone calls from home, and you just have to learn how to kind of sift your way through all that, take a deep breath, and keep them focused.
When they come to you, are they pretty much have they already decided it's time to go back to school? Or do you ever come across, I would think that some of your students, they've been out of school for a long time. I mean, do you ever have to overcome a resistance and tell me about that and how you convince them?
They had to overcome a resistance. So I know that by the time they stepped in my classroom, they just did the hardest part of the job, was making that decision to come back to school and stepping in the classroom and not knowing what they're stepping into. And my job is hospitality. When they come in my room, you are in my home. I spend more time in my classroom than I do where I live. So you are in my home, and I'm going to welcome you in my home, and you're going to feel like a welcome guest, and that door is always going to be open, and the light's always going to be in the window. And when you have a bad day, how about we just take a deep breath and go for a small walk and come back and see me? And you just keep them coming. They have to know that you care for them. They just have to, because somebody has to care. Somebody has to, they're coming in. Sometimes their nerves are shattered. Like, I can see when they come in the door, they stop and their eyes are big and they take a deep breath, especially older students. And then you just can see that the wheels are just going 50 miles an hour. And I have X amount of seconds to calm that down and make it work.
So your background in tourism, and does that come to play here when you talk about?
It does. My background in hospitality and tourism and your brand imaging, so everything. So I am the brand. So yes, they come to my school, oh, this is where I go for adult ed, or this is where I go for my GED. No, this is where you're coming to take that first step for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And I have to make sure you know that, even if you don't recognize it in those words. And so you may have gotten here, but how am I going to get you to stay? Yeah. And that's where my job is. So I am that brand. So even though the ultimate, I'm there's this journey they take to get to the GED, I'm the brand that keeps them there, each and every single one of us in our classrooms every single day. And I work with an amazing staff of teachers and just support staff. They're just a wonderful group of people to work with. And I just think that our students know that when they come in.
I want to talk to you about some of the lives that you've seen change as far as your students. But in talking to you, and you're exposed to so many people from different backgrounds and different experiences, you have to change too, right? Like when you think back to how the Karen who started doing this, how many years ago?
18.
18 years ago versus the Karen now. Like, how has this affected you as a person, and how are you different from?
I'm a completely different person. I remember my first year teaching was at high school, and I spent the whole first year crying because people don't love their kids sometimes, and I was like, oh my God, that these are just your babies. It doesn't matter if they're taller than me, because I'm pretty short, but I just realized, like, you go through life and you make assumptions. You make sure everybody's safe. You make sure everybody can eat. You make sure everybody belongs somewhere. And the first thing you learn is that that's not the case. So you're dealing with situations that are way beyond what you could imagine or what you ever thought you could handle. But then you learn. And so these students, they've touched my lives and have made me a better person, and they've made me a better teacher. And so, it's so funny. People say, oh, but teachers, they just change the world. We can't do it without the students, because the students change us. So one of my things is okay, this student, I'm everything I'm trying to reach the student isn't working. So it must not be about, ABC. It must be about XYZ. What's XYZ? And then I set out. So I'm not even teaching at this point. I'm trying to figure out what's your deal, and so that I know how to reach you. And that's the fun part about it. But the frustrating part, I had a student last year who came into my classroom and just a chip on his shoulder, and he was kind of difficult and really gave me a hard time, and he had these like short bursts of anger, and I would just sit back and let him go. And sometimes I'd open the door and say, hey, do you need to go for a walk? And sometimes he wouldn't come back. And then over the summer, I just touched base and sent a text every once in a while and said, hey, I hope you're doing well. Hope, I'm looking forward to seeing you in the fall. Because when the world shut down in March, that gave a lot of adult students reason to not come back. You go online and the home has one computer. So who's last on the list?
Right.
It's the parent, because the kids in the school or in the home are doing their online stuff first. And so this boy was 18, but didn't get a whole lot of support from home. But he was hungry for the education. But yet when he came in, he didn't really talk to anybody, and he was hard to get close to. And so I warmed up to him over the year. And he came back this year and he said, my mom didn't want me to come back here because I didn't really get a lot done last year. Okay, well, that's the choice that he made, was to not get a lot done. And I'm like, well, I'm so glad that you're back. And he graduated right before Christmas. And so when I see, the quicker I can get them to that first test where they pass it and then they see success, then they realize like, okay, I can breathe. This wasn't so hard. And I have some part of it behind me. Well, if I already started it, I might as well finish it, So my big thing is, well, that time is going to come and go whether you do it or not. So let's make it count. And let's see what we can get done. So, okay, we have 2 months until break. What can we get done in 2 months? And so you learn to take everything that you do or everything that you give the students, or even, week to week, you give them small amounts of time to strive for. Because in that time, I know what I'm going to impart in you. You don't know it, but I do, and I know what it takes to get to the end result. And so I can tell when students come in and I start watching them perform, really how far they have to go. And they're always so much closer than they think, because for them, they're climbing mountains. But for me, it's like I realize they're almost at the peak. So I just have to get them up to that little peak. And then once they slide over the other side of it, guess what? You just open up a whole world to yourself that you didn't even know was possible.
Right.
Because you need your education.
You've had so many, you've mentioned a few, but I'm sure there's so many other stories of students overcoming just incredible odds and challenges and doing this in the face of all kinds of circumstances. Can you think, does the first one, close your eyes, the first one that comes to mind, tell me about that person and how they came to you and then how you saw them leave when they graduated? Oh gosh, I have a couple. My favorite was a 65-year-old man that I taught probably 10 years ago. And his was a little bit of a weird situation because he actually had a college degree. And you would say, well, how do you have a college degree if you don't have a high school degree? Or high school diploma. But he had skipped out of high school as a 15-year-old, lied on an application, and served in World War II because he was fleeing from a very abusive home. He was the only child in a home. He was being raised by a father who was very angry. And over the years, this man became his dad's punching bag, basically. And so he went into the war, and he come back, and he said, well, that didn't kill me, so now what am I going to do? So he took the entry test for college. Back then, I guess if you passed it, then you could get into college without your high school diploma. So he did. And he became an engineer, and he worked for General Electric for like 30 years. And he was so proud of his accomplishments that he had like 2 or 3 different photo albums, and all of the clippings from the newspaper about him over the years was all in here, and everything was chronicled. And he would bring it, just go and just show everybody, look, And then I would say, well, why are you here? And he'd say, because that's the one thing that's missing. And clear in the beginning of his very first photo album was a blank page. So his whole life, okay, now mind you, he's worked, went to war, survived World War II, got married, had kids, worked 30 years, was an engineer, changing lives all over the place. But he didn't even realize the impact he had on people because he felt like there was something about him that was missing. And so his whole life, when he started building these photo, albums, that first page was for his high school diploma. And so when he got the diploma, he came in and he said,
now I finally feel like I have reached every goal I've ever had in my life. And he opened that little plastic, and you're talking the old-fashioned photo albums that have the plastic pages, and he slid that in, and he stood there and cried. So here's a 65-year-old man crying, and here is Miss Hagerty crying,
gosh.
and I was like,
story.
oh my goodness. So that's a whole different reason. But sometimes you have to think we spend our whole lives trying to overcome things that happen in life, because all of us grow up at a different time. And when I think about my own parents who lived through World War II, they were much younger than this man, but I hear about all that they had to give up just living in America as a kid during the war. And then here's this man who actually fought that war, lied to get there because he loved his country so much. And then so he sat there for years and had to try, no matter what kind of accolade he earned, it wasn't right or enough or justified because he didn't have his diploma.
Wow. So
that's one aspect. And then I have fun people come in. So if anybody on the other side of this is crying, I'm sorry. But then I have fun people because my funnest students are the ones that are circus performers. And I think I mentioned that to you.
Yeah.
I had a couple of elephant trainers, and I said, well, how do you become an elephant trainer? And they said that it passes in the family, just like being a king or a queen, like you rise up in the ranks. That's how it is in the elephant training world. You don't go to school to be an elephant trainer. You're born into a family of trainers.
Okay.
And so then when Barnum and Bailey shut their circus down years ago, well, now what do you do with an elephant trainer who only knows how to train elephants? And so they had to come back to school. So here they are, 45. There's two of them, him and his brother. Like they were in the late 30s, maybe 40s. And they had to come back to school because they had to start all back over, because even though the elephants were moved to a preserve, they were going to be sold off, and then they wouldn't have any way of even making a living for their family. And you're talking about men who, and family lines of people, 5-6 generations of elephant trainers, who that income was always there, and the money was good because, hey, who's your competition?
Yeah.
Only so many people can train elephants.
Right.
And so that kind of thing. But I've had a flamethrower. I had a family of contortionists that came from Romania.
That's amazing.
Oh, yeah. I've had clowns. I mean, tightrope walkers. I mean, they're just fun.
Talk about a career change.
Well, and what I love about them is that they play. Like, I know it sounds funny, but they're very driven and they're very articulate, because you cannot walk across a wire with nothing under you without concentrating. So everything you have every day goes into walking that line. Think about this. How many times do teachers try to teach students to walk the line? Right? And they don't get it, right? But then you have this person who comes in and their whole life was walking on the line.
Yeah.
And so their concentration levels are phenomenal. But they concentrate so hard that sometimes it's hard to break in as the teacher. It's like, hey, you don't have to do this alone. You're not going to fall, that kind of thing. And so it's just fun stuff. But they concentrate, and none of them, English was not their main languages, except for the elephant trainers. But so you're dealing with a bilingual, maybe trilingual person who comes from a different culture. So, and then they live a life of, like, I always thought that my students who worked in any kind of, circus are almost like gypsies. They just travel. They don't settle. They don't sit. They don't, they move. They're always on the move. And so if the circus is in town, the circus is going to leave town, and then you may or may not see them the next time the circus comes to town. So then you have this little window to impart something in them and hope it sticks.
Neat.
And that's fun.
Yeah.
And then one time, the family of contortionists actually came in, put a performance on for our students. And that was fun.
You were kind enough to bring one of your recently graduated students, Lizette, with you. So we're going to talk to her for a few minutes to learn more about her story, because she's a great representation of what you've been talking about. And then we'll invite you back for a few more minutes.
Okay, sounds wonderful. Okay.
Welcome, Lizette Cortez.
Hi.
You graduated just a few weeks ago in late December from East Area Adult School with your GED, correct?
Correct.
And I did have the chance to talk to you prior to this show, and I understand this has been a goal that's been a long time in the making for you, right? You're 54 years old?
That is correct.
And a mother of one, a grandmother of two. But you did not have your high school diploma. Tell me just how you came to be someone who did not have her high school diploma into her 50s. Go back in time and tell me how you got it.
Ooh, okay. If I start from the beginning, I can tell you it was difficult being raised by a single parent. Unfortunately, my dad left at an early age. So I was raised by my mother, who in the old age, Hispanic women, since she was the youngest, were taken out of the household, out of school to work in the household.
Okay.
So she became a house person. She knows how to cook, clean, do everything in the house. For reading and writing and arithmetic, my mother could never help me.
Okay. So you didn't have a lot of support at home.
Correct.
Okay.
So everything just fell on me and my teachers. Whichever teacher could support me and help me, that was pretty much how I made it through school.
Okay.
So,
but in high school, it just wasn't capturing your interest. You just didn't really want to be there, and
okay. So all through elementary school and middle school, every time we went for my report card, my teacher was like, she's really, really smart. She's really, really bright. She's just lazy and she won't get it done. So like first semester, first report card, second report card, I'll get by barely skimming through. So when the time came for you to get your third report card, I'd get 100, 100, 100. They were like, if she would just do that from beginning through end, she would, be great. So they'd pass me because they knew I was smart enough. When I got into high school, it was a different story.
Gotcha.
No.
Gotcha. And so you just left.
I didn't have that support. Pretty much. I did not leave. I got kicked out of school.
Oh, okay. All right.
I got kicked out of school for not attending class, for not having that support, and for running around with the wrong crowds.
Gotcha. Okay. And what's really fascinating about you, though, is so you don't have a high school diploma, but for many years you supported your child. You have a daughter.
Yes.
And you worked fairly successfully without a high school diploma. You were a receptionist, a bookkeeper. Tell me, just name a couple of other jobs you held.
So early on, once they let me go from school, I decided to go ahead and be a beautician. So I went to cosmetology school, did that for a while. Got into a relationship with my daughter's father, and that didn't work out. I wound up having a child and having to raise a child by myself, just like my mom. Except I refuse to be a woman who's going to stay in the house and just take care of the house and clean and do everything that. I do that. However, I was like, there has to be another way. There has to be a better life. And decided I'm going to work. And I worked as a receptionist, and I worked there for 5 years. From receptionist, the bookkeeper who sat next to me said, I'm going to show you how to do this. Her name, she was an older Black woman, and her name, I will never forget her, and God rest her soul if she's not around, is Roberta Dowling. And she says, I'm going to teach you this because that little girl is going to need your support and your help. And God bless her, because she taught me how to do the books, and I wound up doing the books. Back then it was the Wainwright system, so there was no computer. You had to write everything out. You had to carbon copy and tear everything up and do the spreadsheet and take the deposit to the bank. I'd do the deposits in the bank, and I'd do everything. It was trustworthy, and thank God for her. It opened doors. So I worked there for 5 years, and then when I decided to relocate to Dallas, I started working at a bank, and from the bank, I just kept going to different locations. And unfortunately, I was fortunate enough to work into accounting, and everything I was being taught was math. And I was like, okay, and I love puzzles. So it was easier for me to find things. So I went from bookkeeper to accounts receivables, accounts payables, team leader, collections. Then I moved here and became a senior account associate. So
that's incredible
all
that you
these
did all that.
titles, and in the back of my head was always, you don't have your diploma.
Yeah.
Like,
well, yeah, I want you to just expound on that for me, that this was something that really nagged at you and that worried you to some extent, that might one day come back to cause you problems.
Me. Yes, haunt me. So every time I'd go on an interview, it was always, oh my God, if they check and find out I don't have a diploma, I'm going to be out of a job. You know, I'm going to be in trouble for, pretty much a lie. Yeah. And I was like, God, please don't let them check. Please don't let them check. And for some reason, it never came up. When I did apply for the senior account associate's position at Disney, so I applied online. I did not read the full job application, and I just had skimmed through it, and I applied for it. And I said, afterwards, I went back and I read it, and I said, oh my God, you need a degree. And I was like, I don't have a degree in math. So I sat there and I was like, I'm sitting there in front of the computer, and I was like, okay, God, if it's meant for me to have this job, you will give me this position. If not, then that's okay. I'm okay with either or. It doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to get the position. And while I was doing that, I was going to school at night doing my GED.
Okay. Yeah. What made you say the time is right to go back and get this finished?
I had to. I had to because now I have grandkids. And I said, I've pushed my daughter. I've helped my nephew. I've helped so many kids around me, even my nephew and my niece that were here just recently from this COVID issue. They were staying with us here in Florida. And I said, how can I push all these kids to do better and be better and tell them this is what you need to do to get here and here and here.
If you haven't done it yourself.
And I haven't actually done it. How can I preach something and not actually do it?
Right. So 54 years old, you did it. You got your high school diploma, your GED.
Yes.
What does that feel like?
When I got it, I was so excited because I was like, oh my God, finally. Like I finally finished.
Yeah.
And it was like, I can't believe it. To this day, I'm like, okay, is it real?
Yeah.
Is it real?
Yeah. Do you feel more, do you feel like you carry yourself a little differently? Do you feel like you're...
I think a little bit changed on me. Like I didn't feel this burden on my shoulder. I feel like a weight was lifted off my shoulder because now it's like, yes, I do have it. Right. I don't have to worry about not having it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What can you say to your grandkids now and your nephew and your niece? When you give them that advice, like has that advice changed or has that encouragement changed now that it's a little bit more authentic given what you've accomplished yourself?
So the first person I actually contacted was my daughter. And I told my daughter, I did it. And she goes, what? And I was like, I did it. She goes, you did what? And I'm like, I am a high school graduate. She goes, oh my gosh, Mom, congratulations. And she, when I told her that I was going to school, that reason why I moved to Florida is because I needed to go to school because I was always taking care of everyone else. Yeah. And I didn't have time for myself. She was like, why now? And I was like, because it's something that I have to finish.
Yeah.
Not for anybody else. It's for me, because it's always a little gnawed in the back of my head, that little question mark of every interview that I went on was, are they going to ask me if I have a high school diploma or not?
Right.
And I think the reason why they didn't ask me was because of the history and my work history and all the things that I've done that there was never a question. They assumed that I had so much knowledge that she has to have a high school diploma. They never questioned it.
Sure. You're on a show today with Karen Hagerty, who teaches in the GED program where you got your GED, East Area Adult. And she mentioned earlier how a lot of her job is is hospitality and making people want to come back to the classroom and getting them to continue going. How did she do that for you? Were there times when maybe you didn't want to keep going? And how did Karen keep you coming back?
Oh, no, there was never a time that I didn't want to keep going. She is as pleasant as she says. She makes you want to come into the classroom. I know there was one instance where I showed up at school and they wanted to do that check.
The temperature?
The temperature check. So I get migraines off of that little radiation that they shoot.
Okay.
And Karen came out to the parking lot because I wasn't in class and I'm sitting in my car. She comes and knocks on my window. What are you doing? And I'm like, hey. She goes, are you coming to class? I was like, yeah and no. She goes, what do you mean yeah and no? And I said, I can't go to class. She goes, why? I said, because they want to do the temperature check and it gives me a migraine and I can't study with a migraine. So she was like, what are you talking about? I was like, I can't do it. So we had a discussion and she goes, hold on 1 minute. And I told them to take it on my arm or my shoulder or my neck. No, they said they had to take it on my head. So Karen says, hold on. She walks inside the school and has a discussion, comes back out. And I'm like, okay, what is going on? So she goes, okay, unfortunately, we can't let you inside the school. But if you go home and go get your thermometer and come back, you can do that. And I look at her and I go, where's the closest Walmart? And she starts laughing. And she goes, there's not one around here, but there's a Walgreens. True story. I go to Walgreens and I pick up 2 thermometers. I get one for me and one for her.
Okay.
And I come back to school and I do the thermometer and go in because she goes, before I even went to go get the thermometer, you sure you're coming back? You sure you're coming back? Yes. She goes, are you sure you're going to come back? Yes. I give my word. If I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do something.
Right. Yeah.
So when she saw me come back into class, she was happy, you know.
So she stays on her students.
Yes.
Anything that they need to continue going, she'll do it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I just love about your story and the stories that sort of the common thread amongst non-traditional students is that you were later in life, you had responsibilities, you had a lot of reasons maybe not to bother with this, but you did. And what would you say to someone who might, whatever the goal is, whether it's going back to school or taking up a new hobby or running a marathon, whatever it is, there are people who say to themselves all the time, it's too late. It's too late for me. My time passed. What would you say to them?
I've heard a lot of people tell me that it's too late. I've even been told myself, it's too late for you to learn something new. I will challenge you. It's never too late to learn anything new. I have been in 2 car accidents where my back was injured really, really bad. And I couldn't sit and I couldn't lay down. My most comfortable position was standing up. I had to recuperate from that for 2 years, going to the chiropractor and getting therapy and everything. It taught me that if I can train my body and I can get physically well, I can also train my brain.
Yeah.
And you can learn something new. It is never too late to learn anything new. Never. Yeah. There's such a thing as a late bloomer.
Yeah.
There is.
Yeah. Thank you for coming in today,
You're
Lizette,
welcome.
and sharing this story. I very much appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So we've just heard from Lizette Cortez, one of your students who accomplished her goal of getting her GED late in life. How does it make you feel when you hear her story?
I'm just so happy for her because I know what those steps that you take in your life when you keep trying as a single mom, because I'm also a single mom. So I think sometimes I resonate with my students, but I know what it takes to get to that goal. And sometimes you take 2 steps forward and 10 back and that kind of thing. And then, but you get there. And then next thing you know, you're over the line. And then, it's such a relief. So when somebody like Lizette, when any of my students graduate, I'm just so happy for them because that foundation is built on what they achieved, and I got to be a part of it. And so, yes, they changed who I am. And I have to just tell you a cute story. Yes, the thermometer story is true, and I do have a thermometer from her. But she actually came to my classroom and then took a small sabbatical where she took a job, and then and was going to switch to a different classroom, and then she's like, oh no, and she came back to my room. So I was kind of worried that I wasn't going to get to see the end result. Because when students graduate and they take the math test on my campus, because there's 2 test centers in Polk County, and our school is one of them. So when they take their last test at our school, I get to see the diploma.
Yeah.
Like, I would not normally get to see that. And so to me, it's like, we did it.
Yeah.
Like, not you did it. Yes, the student did it because they did all the work, but I just feel like I'm a part of that. Like, that's my diploma too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Karen, I have loved talking to you, and I love what you do, and it's so inspiring. I try to ask everyone, the premise of the show is that everyone who's a part of our school district contributes something unique and special. And I wondered what, in your words, in your mind, what is it that you think that you contribute to Polk County Public Schools?
Oh, wow. I've never thought about it because the focus was never on me. It's always about them. And so to the Polk County schools, I would like to think that the people who I work with and who supervise me know that when I'm in charge of something that they don't have to worry about it because I've got it. Oh, Karen's doing that? Okay, well, we're good. And then they can concentrate on other things that maybe need a little bit more attention. But I can tell you that my favorite part of every year is when I am standing in the audience and my students are walking across the stage, getting their diplomas. I feel like sometimes I'm looking at my children. Like, you know how you get that just, you're so proud of who they are, and then you see that face that maybe I haven't seen in a couple months because they've graduated, and so it's a familiar face, and oh, there's that beautiful smile, and oh, look how happy that person is, and I got to be a part of that, And so that's when I realized how much I've impacted their lives, is when they walked across the stage at graduation that they never thought they would see.
Right.
And then I get the chills and I get the goosebumps and I get such a sense of pride. But it's still, at that moment, it's still not about me. Because then I get to wonder, like, well, now they're going to go out in the world, so I hope they do something good with that. Like, I wonder where that's going to take them. And I don't think I'm quite enough years into teaching to see that impact. Where a student comes, every once in a while I'll be on Facebook or something and I'll come across an old student. Oh, they got married. Oh, look, they have kids. Oh, look how cute. That kind of thing. Yeah. But one day I want to be somewhere in society and hear a name, whether it be a sound system or a public speaker or whatever, and know that they didn't just get the diploma, that they've taken it to the next level and they're giving back. Because you always give something to the world when you go out into it, but a lot of people don't choose a life of service, and so they don't give back in the way that teachers give, because we do a lot. And so when I see one of my students become a teacher, or I see them become a nurse, or like something where they're just giving back with that knowledge base, they didn't just take it and stop. Like, okay, this is the foundation. This is just a step. I'm going to go on with this diploma, and I'm going to do something else, and then they do.
Yeah.
And then.
That's
because they couldn't have done that without the diploma.
Yeah.
And so that's what I like to see, is when the student finally makes it and then they begin to change people's lives the way I had the opportunity to do.
Yeah.
Even if they don't know that that's what they're doing, we as teachers know that's what they're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Karen.
You're welcome. It was a
so
pleasure to be here.
appreciative that you came in and you shared the story of your work and your students with us. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did you change careers to become a teacher, para, or bus driver? Do you remember the moment when you knew a career in education was right for you? Are you a PCPS alumnus who remembers the teacher who made you believe you were capable of great things? Are you a student who is already putting your K-12 education to work in our community? We all have a story to tell, and those stories are part of what makes PCPS great. Tell us yours. To be a guest or to nominate someone you know to be featured on The People of PCPS, fill out the form posted online at polkschoolsfl.com/podcast. Thanks for listening.
You can subscribe to the People of PCPS podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or watch online at the Polk County Public Schools YouTube channel. To learn more about the People of PCPS and other Polk County Public Schools podcasts, visit polkschoolsfl.com/podcasts.